This is the historic Double O Ranch on the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge southwest of Burns. Established in 1875, some buildings were burned during the Bannock Indian War 3 years later. In 1903, the ranch was sold to Bill Hanley and developed into a major cattle operation while hosting notables like President Teddy Roosevelt. It was later acquired by the federal government and added to the 189,000-acre Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 1941. Century-old barbed wire is still evident and presents a barrier for animal migration, and is being removed by volunteers with the Oregon Natural Desert Association.
So this trip we're working out on the refuge to remove barbed wire fence, which inhibits wildlife migrations, and since this is a wildlife refuge, it's a very important area for us to remove obstacles for wildlife.
Pronghorn antelope and mule deer migrate in search of shelter, food, and water, and getting tangled in barbed wire can be fatal.
So wildlife learn these pathways, if you will, between their resting areas and their feeding areas, and of course they focus around water. And so if there's a fence there that bisects that corridor, that migration corridor, that movement corridor, then it becomes a hazard. So it increases the mortality, the probability of mortality of especially bird species and occasionally deer species. Deer become entangled, and they can't get out once they're entangled in fences.
As witnessed with four-legged critters, barbed wire and birds often don't mix.
Malheur National Wildlife Refuge has been historically one of the most important places for migrating birds to be able to stop. So along the Pacific Flyway, there are pockets of wetlands, especially once you get to the east side of the Cascades, where birds are able to find food and water and a place to rest. As people have moved into the West and as areas have been developed for irrigation and farming and things like that, we have seen a lot of important stopover habitat disappear or shrink. And so places like the refuge, where what's left of that really important stopover habitat is being protected, are becoming increasingly important as other places for them to stop are disappearing.
Having this refuge as a stopping point allows them to arrive on their breeding ground in the condition in which they can begin to nest and go through that whole breeding cycle successfully. So it's key to the migration.
How many miles do you plan to take out?
So we've actually got only about 2 miles here at the Double O, but that is very tough fence to pull. So what we're looking at right now is some of the easiest fence that we're pulling. We've got some that stretches across the water, and we've got some that goes through some really deep cattails and willow. So 2 miles often is not much for us, but this is the really tough stuff to pull, so it'll keep us busy, I think, for the whole weekend here.
This is probably really old wire too.
Some of it is, yeah. There's some of it was put up a long time ago, and we're finding that there's some that's buried underground and then they just built more fence on top of it. Some that's wrapped around rocks.
As bird watchers mark their calendars to view over 300 species at the annual Harney County Bird Festival each April, they are happy to recognize the work of the many volunteers making the refuge a safer place for animal and bird migration. At the Double O Ranch on the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, I'm Brian Jennings for The Great Outdoors.